Freud said that your personality was pretty much set by the time you turned 5. It's kind of horrifying to think. And we know from the research, that that's not necessarily at all the case. And we know that we do know though that your personality is relatively stable through adulthood, although it does tend to change a bit as we age. However, we do know that you can take action to make changes. You also might be thinking that if you're born this way, that's what a lot of people think. Well, if I'm born this way, how can I make changes? I've always been outgoing, or I've never liked meeting new people. But what we know, again, from the research is that personality is mostly due to a mix of your genes and your environment. So nature and nurture, it's a mix. Nature is definitely a big component, but nurture is in the running. Things that are heritable doesn't mean they're not changeable. Psychologists we've spent decades coming up with different theories of what traits make up a person's personality. But in the 70s, it's really cool how this stuff happens. In the 1970s, 2 research teams working independently came up with what is now known as the Big 5 personality traits, which is what really most things are based on. And yeah, there's the MBTI, or you might do one of your little things at work, a Myers-Briggs or something. But I say with love, there's really not a lot of research to support a lot of that stuff. There's just not. There's research to support the things that go into it, but there's not, like why you would look at this or look at that. But there's really not a lot on the other side that's super, super robust and reputable. But, and I love all those things. I love taking a good test, but really the Big 5 personality traits, we've got a lot to back us up. So these 2 teams got to this at pretty much the same time. The first team was made up of Paul Costa and Robert McCrae at the National Institutes of Health. And the other team was Warren Norman. He was at the University of Michigan, and Louis Goldberg, who was at the University of Oregon. And although they took slightly different paths how they got there, they ended up at the same place. So, and what's most important, at least to me, to note here is that neither set of researchers was trying to find these, I'm trying to prove these 5 dimensions of personality. Instead, they didn't go in with the 5 going, let's prove it. Instead, these were the 5 dimensions that emerged as a result of their research. So I find that compelling, huge, way to go. So after you listen today, I have a link to take a test to see. I know, who doesn't love a test? Aren't you excited now? There's many tests, so you can go look online yourself and find one. But I like this test. It's put out by a bunch of, it is the test. It's put out by a bunch of researchers who are using it for research purposes, which I like. And it's a very cool way when you take the test. There's a way that you can take it where you compare yourself to someone else. And often that gives us better results, we know from the research, because you might think, oh, I'm not very open, but then, or whatever, or I'm not whatever. And then when you compare yourself to somebody that you might see, oh, I'm more open than them. You might score yourself, or, oh, I think I'm open, but I'm actually not as open as they are. It gives you more relativity to give yourself a better score. So this particular test is even more robust, I think, than other tests. So I will link to it. If you're watching me on YouTube, hello, like, subscribe, leave a comment. Tell me how much you like my shirt or my earring or something. Just say hi. If you're over there, then it'll be listed below in the resources, below the video. Okay. So any way you go, you can find it. All right. It's also important to note that these Big 5 traits hold up even when taking culture and language into account. There are, of course, whenever you look at culture and language too, there are always some fascinating differences when you look at the research, but there's really nothing that stands out as statistically significant, at least so far. So for all of my beautiful people listening from, Australia or Great Britain or wherever, if you're sitting there in Sweden right now listening or watching, you can still take the test and it really should be spot on. Okay. So, I'm always thinking of you too. All right. So all of the personality traits, excuse me, this big five, are really on, I want you to think of them on a continuum. But let me just explain the traits themselves. And then we'll chat about what it means to be high in a trait or low in that. What are those big five traits? So in school, way back in school, way long ago, I was a student. I'm always a student, but you know what I mean. And I was taught to remember the big five personality traits with the acronym OCEAN. And that's how I'm going to teach them to you today, OCEAN. So the O is for openness. Again, it's going to be a continuum, and I'll explain it in a minute. The C is for conscientiousness. The E is for extroversion. Sometimes it says it's extraversion with an A, and sometimes extroversion with an O. It's the same. So both terms are appropriate. So whichever way you see it written, it's fine. The A is for agreeableness, and the N is for neuroticism. And all of these categories might not be what you think they are. So really listen well. Let's start with openness, OCEAN, right? Openness. Openness, the continuum for openness would start with a high of being very creative and a low of resisting change and new ideas. So that's how I want you to think of this, again, continuum. And you can be anywhere on the continuum, just because you could score in the middle, you could score really low, really high, whatever. So people who score higher on this dimension would be creative. They like new challenges. They're open to trying new things, meeting new people. Whereas people on the lower end of this continuum would be more rigid or maybe conventional, you would think of them. There's more right or wrong or black and white thinking, and they're not very imaginative. They'd likely struggle with abstract concepts, whereas people who score higher on openness are really great with abstract. They could talk about things in that way. And people scoring lower would rather stick to routine and not try new things. Conscientiousness, the continuum here would start with a high of being really organized, thoughtful about things, and a low of a lot of procrastination and really being more messy. I say with love in your life and scheduling. So this is like when we think of conscientiousness, we don't always think of it in this way. That's why I'm saying it might not be the definition you've already thought of. So that hence listening, closely to what I'm saying. So people scoring higher on conscientiousness have better impulse control. They see the details in things. They're looking for the details. They even enjoy the details. They like having a set schedule and goals. Meanwhile, people who score lower on this dimension, they don't generally like structure. They often don't complete tasks. They're more easily distracted and can even be irresponsible. And I know some of you are like, well, that's just ADHD. It's not. Some people might have ADHD and show up that way more, but it does not mean that. And I think, again, we confuse sometimes mental health symptoms with personality traits. And that happens a lot. I say this a lot to addicts, people who are addicted to drugs and alcohol. When people are struggling or have a drug or alcohol problem, they often, when they're in the throes of their addiction, will act very lazy or lie a lot or cheat or be irresponsible or self-centered, all those things. But when we're clean or sober, the symptoms alleviate. And we are not those things. Our true personality comes forward. We are not lazy. We are not those things. I am certainly not lazy. I'll tell you that. I got a lot of things going on in my life. But when I was a drug addict, I was very lazy. I didn't want to do anything. So that's what happens. And we can easily mistake one for the other. And it's really important to separate the two. Okay? Really important. All right. So that was the O and the C in ocean. Now we're going to get to the E, which is extroversion. And this particular continuum of the big five personality traits is about how sociable you are. Okay. To me, it's the broadest of the traits, when we talk about these continuums, with higher scores showing more initiative, feeling energized by others, being more sociable, enjoying new people, new experiences, being really good at communicating, being comfortable as a center of attention, all those things would be on the higher end of extroversion. On, of course, the lower end of extroversion, we would think of introversion. And that's at the lower end, which would include people who prefer being alone, who feel drained by other people, who are maybe more reserved, and sometimes seen as shy, although introversion and shyness do not need to be the same. Again, these can be different. And likely more submissive to authority, actually, on that end. So, okay, so that's openness, conscientiousness, extroversion. Those are the first OCE. And the A is agreeableness. In Ocean is agreeableness. And this trait is all about how you deal with other people. So people who are highly agreeable are friendly, they're altruistic, they're empathetic, they enjoy helping others, they care about others, they're warm. On the lower end of this particular spectrum of agreeableness are people who don't care so much about other people. It doesn't mean you're mean or evil, but they just don't. They're more shy, they're often suspicious of others. They might not care how other people feel. They'd be more egocentric. They're more competitive. They have little interest in someone else's struggles and might belittle or insult other people. They might manipulate others to get what they want, any of those things. I know. And now we're to the N of Ocean, the last one, which is neuroticism. I know you think, everyone's probably going, I'm high on neuroticism, Abby. Well, you don't know that for sure, okay? But yes, you might be, but let's not assume it. Neuroticism, this continuum is all about your emotional stability. So people scoring, this is one of the ones you don't want to score high on, okay? So the other four, you want to score sort of high on openness or conscientiousness, or higher, I should say. Not necessarily high, but agreeableness, extroversion. But with neuroticism, you want to score lower, right? So people who are scoring higher on this trait they're anxious, they're irritable, they're more sad, they have less self-confidence, more anxiety. They experience a high amount of stress in their overall lives. That's what I see the most. People with lower scores on the neuroticism dimension are more emotionally stable. They're more resilient. They bounce back easier from setbacks. They're more calm and relaxed. They have more self-confidence, and they're really just more satisfied overall in their lives. They are rarely sad or depressed. Again, when you're like way on, so you could be in the spectrum. Remember, the continuum. You're not necessarily extroverted or introverted or neurotic or not. It's where are you in the spectrum of things. So the research shows, and I'm sure it doesn't take a genius to see why, that the people who score higher on the first four traits and lower on the last trait, neuroticism, the research shows they're more satisfied in their lives, they report being happier, and they're physically healthier than on the other end. So the good news is that the research also shows that you can likely move these scores into more satisfying areas for yourself, so you can shift your personality. How permanent those changes become really boils down to your consistency and changing really, this important factor,